My fiancée wanted to explore her feelings for a coworker 2 months before our wedding. So I ended everything and let them have each other. And guess who showed up again after 8 months? My fiancée wanted a hall pass to test drive her coworker before marrying me. And I gave her something better, a permanent vacation from the relationship, with a plot twist because he had a fiancée too. So read the whole thing because it's delicious. I'm Nate, 29, male, and I work in aviation safety certification and flight software compliance, basically making sure the systems that keep planes from falling out of the sky meet federal standards. I spend half my life in hangars, airport offices, and regional terminals across the Midwest, and the other half on I-70 or sitting in MCI waiting for delayed flights. It pays well and I'm good at it. I was engaged to Katia for 14 months, together for almost 3 years total. She's originally from Ukraine, came to the States for grad school and stayed, and I met her at a friend's birthday party at this rooftop bar in the Crossroads district. She was stunning, like stop mid-sentence stunning, dark hair, sharp features, dressed like she'd just stepped out of a European fashion magazine. Way out of my league, or so I thought at the time, but she seemed genuinely interested. We talked for 2 hours about everything, her transition to American life, my weird job that nobody understands, the best barbecue spots in Kansas City, and she had this way of giving you her full attention like nothing else in the room mattered, and I was hooked immediately. The first year was incredible. She introduced me to her world, these elaborate dinner parties with her friends where everyone dressed up and the food was always homemade and impressive. And I introduced her to Chiefs games and hole-in-the-wall barbecue joints that she pretended to enjoy more than she probably did, and we balanced each other out. Looking back, I was probably more accommodating than I should have been. She had strong opinions about everything, where we ate, what we did on weekends, how I dressed when we went out. And I went along with most of it because it seemed easier and honestly I wanted her to be happy. My best friend Cody called me whipped more than once, and I told him he was just jealous. He told me I was just blind, but I wasn't a complete pushover. When she wanted me to skip my cousin's wedding because her coworker was having a gallery opening the same night, I said no. When she suggested I should find a job that didn't require so much travel because she didn't like being alone, I told her my career wasn't negotiable. I had a backbone. I just didn't use it as often as I should have. The engagement happened 14 months ago at her favorite restaurant on the plaza. I'd planned it for weeks, coordinated with the staff, had the ring hidden in my jacket pocket all through dinner, and the ring itself was my grandmother's, a vintage piece with a center diamond and 2 smaller sapphires, which I'd had reset in a more modern band because Katia had specific taste and my grandmother's original setting wasn't going to cut it. When I got down on one knee, she actually teared up, said yes before I finished the question, and posted it on Instagram within 30 seconds. The picture got 400 likes in an hour, and she changed her profile bio to future Mrs. before we'd even gotten the check. Her parents flew in from Chicago the following month to celebrate. Her mom brought traditional Ukrainian pastries she'd spent 2 days making, and her dad brought his handshake and his expectations. Her dad, Victor, was this old-school Eastern European guy who shook my hand like he was testing my grip strength, and her mom, Irina, was warmer but clearly had high standards for whoever was marrying her daughter, and I passed inspection apparently. Victor told me privately that he was glad Katia had found someone stable, someone who would take care of her, and I took that responsibility seriously, maybe too seriously. We found an apartment together in a nice building near the plaza, split rent 60-40 since I made more, and started planning the wedding for early June. Her parents offered to contribute toward the costs, which was generous considering the budget kept creeping upward, because Katia had a vision. The venue had to be perfect, the flowers had to be specific, and the guest list kept expanding because she couldn't possibly exclude anyone from her social circle. By the time we locked everything in, we were looking at 140 guests, a venue in Parkville with a river view, a 6-piece band, and a photographer who'd shot weddings for Kansas City Chiefs players. The total budget had ballooned to $62,000. Her parents were contributing $20,000, and I was covering the rest. Every vendor had deposits down. Save the dates were on refrigerators across 3 states, and I went along with all of it. I wrote checks, nodded along at fabric samples, pretended to care about the difference between ivory and eggshell, because that's what you do when you're building a life with someone. You compromise, except what I didn't realize at the time was that I was the only one compromising. 2 months before the wedding, Everything was locked in, the venue booked, the caterer confirmed, the photographer scheduled, save the date sent, her dress being altered, my suit ordered, the countdown officially on, and then Tuesday happened. I had just gotten back from a 3-day trip to Wichita, certifying some avionics upgrades for a regional carrier. Long days in a stuffy hangar reviewing documentation, running tests, dealing with mechanics who thought compliance was more of a suggestion than a requirement. I was exhausted, but it was a good tired, the kind that comes from doing your job well. When I walked into the apartment, Katia was sitting at our kitchen table, and she had this look on her face I'd never seen before, serious, but also almost rehearsed. She told me she needed to talk to me about something important, about us, about the wedding, and I sat down across from her, still in my work clothes, assuming this was going to be about seating arrangements or some kind of vendor drama. She said she'd been doing a lot of thinking lately, about commitment, about being sure, and then she said she thought we should take a break before the wedding. I asked her what kind of break she meant, and that's when she told me about Dimitri, a guy from her office, some project manager she'd been working closely with on a big campaign. She said they'd developed a connection, an emotional connection, and that before she walked down the aisle, she thought she should explore those feelings just to be completely sure she was making the right choice. I sat there trying to process what she was saying, because my fiancé, 2 months before our wedding, was asking permission to pursue another man, a coworker, someone she saw every single day while I was traveling for work. I asked her how long this had been going on, and she immediately got defensive, said nothing had happened, that they'd just been talking and getting close. She said he understood her in ways that were different, that he was there when I was always gone, and the accusation landed exactly where she wanted it to, like I was somehow responsible for her developing feelings for another guy because my job required travel. I asked her what exactly I was supposed to do during this exploration period, and she said I should wait for her, give her space to figure out her feelings, saying it as casually as if she were asking me to pick up milk on the way home. She told me that if I really loved her, I'd want her to be certain, that I'd want her to come into our marriage without any doubts, and it was obvious she'd rehearsed this whole thing, had her talking points ready, probably got advice from some friend who told her this was a reasonable request. What she didn't account for was that she assumed I'd react the way I always did, accommodate, compromise, put her needs first, but instead I stood up and told her no break, no exploration, no waiting around while she figured out if some other guy was a better option, that we were either getting married or we weren't, and if she needed to explore feelings for a coworker, then we weren't. Her face changed instantly, the rehearsed calm cracking as she insisted she wasn't asking to break up, that she just needed space and time to process, asking if I even understood the difference, and I told her I understood perfectly, that she wanted to keep me on the hook while she test drove someone else, that it wasn't space, it was treating me like a backup plan, and I looked her straight in the eyes and told her I don't do backup plans. She started getting emotional then, accused me of being unreasonable, said she was trying to be honest instead of cheating behind my back, said most guys would appreciate that kind of transparency, and I told her most guys would have walked out 30 seconds into that conversation and that I was just slower to catch up. Then I asked for the ring back, and everything shifted, the tears stopped, her eyes went cold, and she asked if I was serious, and I told her I'd never been more serious about anything. She said it was a gift and that I couldn't just demand it back because I was upset, and I told her the engagement was over and that meant the ring came back. That's how it works. We went back and forth for another 10 minutes, her cycling through guilt, anger, bargaining, and me not budging, until she finally yanked the ring off her finger and threw it at my chest, and I caught it clean out of the air. She grabbed her purse and headed for the door, but before she left, she turned around with her eyes blazing and told me I'd never find someone as beautiful as her, that no one would ever love me the way she did, that I was making the biggest mistake of my life, and then she slammed the door so hard the pictures on the wall rattled. I stood there alone in our apartment holding my grandmother's ring, and the strange thing was I didn't feel sad. I felt relieved, like I'd been waiting for the other shoe to drop for months and it finally had. Then I texted Cody, and his response came back in under a minute, telling me finally, "Bro, it took you long enough to grow a pair," asking if I wanted hot wings because he was on his way, and 4 to 5 minutes later he showed up with a bag of wings from our usual spot, a notebook, and a grin on his face like Christmas had come early, because he'd never liked Katia and always said she treated me like an accessory. She had said she was more interested in having a fiancé than having me specifically, and I had always defended her, Always told him he didn't understand her. Told him he was being unfair. Only to realize he'd understood her better than I ever did. And he dropped the wings onto the table, cracked open a can of energy drink, pointed straight at me, and said, "Walk me through everything, start to finish, don't leave anything out." So I did. I walked him through the entire conversation while he listened without interrupting, which was rare for him. And when I finished, he just shook his head and said, "Honestly, I'm surprised it took this long. A woman who posts your engagement ring before she even calls her mom isn't in love with you. Bro, she's in love with the announcement." And I had to admit he had a point. Then he pulled out his notebook, uncapped a pen, and said we're approaching this like a project, deliverables, timelines, dependencies, and I stared at him and asked if he was serious right now, and he said dead serious. Because most guys fumble breakups by reacting emotionally instead of strategically, and we were making sure I wasn't fumbling the bag, which made me blink and say wait. What? Only for him to tell me to shut up and listen. And within 20 minutes he had mapped out everything I needed to handle. The apartment lease, the wedding vendors, the joint accounts, the shared subscriptions, the narrative control, even assigning priorities, high impact, low effort stuff first. Starting with the subscriptions, something I hadn't even thought about. Even though Katia and I had combined basically everything over the past 2 years, streaming services, grocery delivery, cloud storage, music, fitness apps, meal planning services, all under my accounts, all tied to my payment info, and she used them constantly, her entire digital life running on infrastructure I was paying for, and Cody circled that section 3 times and said this right here. This is the petty satisfaction column. Not necessary for the breakup but important for morale. My morale specifically, and I told him I didn't want to be petty, but he said it wasn't petty, it was practical, asking why I should pay for services for someone who had just asked to explore another guy. Leaning back and adding that watching her get logged out of everything one by one was going to be special. And again, he had a point. But before any of that I had a more important message to send because I knew Katia and I knew how she operated. The second she calmed down she'd start working the narrative, calling friends, texting family, framing it as me overreacting to a reasonable request. And by morning I'd be the villain who abandoned her over a simple conversation about feelings. So I needed to get ahead of it and typed one short, factual, emotionless text. Katia asked me tonight to take a break from our engagement so she could explore her feelings for a coworker named Dimitri. I declined and ended the engagement. The wedding is cancelled. I wanted you to hear this from me directly, and I sent it to her parents, her sister, and 3 mutual friends I knew would spread it further. Then I turned off my phone and finished my wings while Cody called it the narrative lock, saying whoever controls the story controls the outcome. And by sending that text I'd made it impossible for her to rewrite what happened without looking like she was lying to her own family. And by the next morning it had worked. Her sister had screenshot it to the family group chat. 2 mutual friends had already told their entire circles. And one guy I'd sent it to worked with Katia at her agency, so by lunch her whole office knew. Not from gossip but from the facts I'd sent before she could spin anything. Though she tried anyway, telling people I'd overreacted to a simple conversation about pre-wedding nerves. But when follow-up questions came her story collapsed. The details didn't match, the timeline didn't work, and everyone had already seen my text with Dimitri's name in it. And then I called Victor, her dad, because I'd always respected him and felt he deserved a real conversation, not just a text. And he answered on the second ring, his voice heavy, clearly having already read the message, asking if it was true, every word. "Victor," I said. And he went quiet long enough that I could hear him breathing before asking what I needed from him regarding the wedding costs. And I told him I'd handle cancelling everything and we could split any non-refundable deposits, since he'd contributed around $20,000 toward the venue, catering, and other vendors, and I even offered to cover the losses myself since I was the one ending it. But he cut me off firmly, saying no, his daughter made this mess and he wasn't letting me pay for her mistakes. Because in his family when someone breaks their word they bear the consequences, not the person who was wronged. And then he said he'd raised Katia to know better, that he'd tried to teach her that trust is built, not thrown away for excitement, that he didn't know where he'd gone wrong but he was ashamed of what she'd done. And I told him it wasn't his fault. People make their own choices, and he said that was generous of me, more than she deserved, and I could hear Ina in the background, upset and asking what was happening. Victor telling her they'd talk after he finished with me. And before hanging up his voice softened as he said he'd hoped I'd be part of the family, that I was a good man, and his daughter was a fool, which hit harder than I expected, especially coming from an old-school Ukrainian father who probably wasn't easy to impress. And it meant something, and by Wednesday morning I was already making calls. The venue coordinator, understanding but firm about the cancellation policy, would lose about $8,000 total between the venue deposit and the caterers, and Victor handled that call himself, insisted on it, while the photographer refunded most of my deposit since she was able to rebook the date quickly, telling me she was sorry things didn't work out but that she'd seen enough to know calling it off now saved everyone more pain later. The florist kept $1,500, the DJ kept $500, and the band was the biggest hit after the venue with $3,000 non-refundable and no exceptions. And I kept calling, the rental company for the tables and chairs, the bakery, the calligrapher who'd done the invitations, the hotel where we'd blocked rooms for out-of-town guests. And by noon I'd made 14 calls and watched about $13,000 go up in smoke on a wedding that wasn't happening. And by Wednesday afternoon the wedding website was gone because I'd built it on a platform under my email, so I just deleted the whole thing. The registry disappeared with it. All those carefully selected kitchen items and fancy linens gone. The visual proof of our upcoming marriage erased. Something Cody had suggested specifically because for someone like Katia the public-facing stuff would hurt more than anything private since her whole identity was wrapped up in how things look to other people. Remove the optics, remove her power, and he wasn't wrong. Because around for that afternoon she started blowing up my phone with texts, calls, voicemails, having apparently gone to show a friend the registry and found nothing. Then checked the wedding website and found nothing. Then called the venue and discovered her own father had cancelled everything. Her messages growing increasingly frantic, then angry, then threatening, accusing me of trying to humiliate her, of going behind her back to her own family, of being vindictive and cruel, and I didn't respond to any of it. And that evening I logged into all our shared accounts, streaming services first, changed the password on the main one, removed her profile, moved to the next platform and did the same thing, cloud storage, grocery delivery, music, fitness app, meal planning service, the language learning app she'd used exactly twice, everything, while Cody sat across from me watching and grinning, having brought snacks and looking like the Michael Jackson gif, saying this was better than any show we could have been watching on those streaming services as he stuffed chips in his mouth. And I knew it was petty, but he was right. Because why should I keep paying for someone who just tried to put me on a shelf while she shopped around? And the text that came after that was something else. Apparently she'd been in the middle of a show when everything logged her out, then tried to order groceries and got declined, then couldn't access the playlist she'd been curating for months, then tried to use the cloud storage where she kept all her design files for work and got a password error. The messages moving through confusion first, then realization, then anger, until she started sending angry voicemails with her accent slipping, yelling that I cancelled everything, that she was in the middle of a show, calling me petty and childish, saying she couldn't believe she wasted 3 years on me, Tai shows Uriv, saying I thought this hurt her but it was nothing, that I was nothing, Mudak, which made Cody die laughing as he said she was having an existential crisis. And when she tried to sign up for her own accounts she found out some of the premium features I'd been paying for weren't available on the basic plans, prompting another round of messages asking if I was seriously going to make her pay full price for services she'd been using for free for 2 years, all of which I ignored, because as Cody said the silence was the best part and nothing would drive her crazier than me not engaging at all. And I slept better that night than I had in months. Though the apartment situation was still the big one since we were both on the lease through October and breaking it early meant penalties and I didn't want months of awkward cohabitation while she figured out her next move, especially with the risk of her trying to make my life difficult, which she did, because after the subscription shutdown she decided to fight back by calling my company's HR department claiming I'd been harassing her, saying she felt unsafe and demanding they do something about it. Except there was nothing to do something about since I hadn't contacted her directly since the lease meeting. Every message she sent had gone unanswered and the text I'd sent her family was factual with no threats or insults. So when HR called me I forwarded the relevant screenshots showing she'd been the one sending aggressive messages and they closed the case in about 20 minutes. And then she tried calling the apartment management to get me removed from the lease for creating a hostile living environment. Except I wasn't living there at that point, because I was staying with Cody temporarily while I figured out the move, and the building manager, who'd seen enough breakup drama to write a book about it, wasn't interested in getting involved in our situation beyond handling the paperwork. And when Katia tried to get ahead of me with the wedding vendors by calling the venue and pretending she was handling the cancellation herself while trying to redirect my deposit refunds to her account, the Venue coordinator called me to verify, and once I explained the situation, she flagged Katia's number in their system, the caterer getting a similar call with the same result. And none of her attempts to get back at me worked because there was nothing to get back at since I wasn't engaging or attacking, and she had no idea how to fight that. So Thursday morning I went to the leasing office and explained everything. The manager sympathetic as she laid out the options, saying if one of us wanted to take over the lease solo it could work, or if we both wanted out there'd be a 2-month penalty. And when I asked about my options specifically, she told me that if I could find a replacement tenant and Katia agreed to sign off, I could be out within 30 days. So I made some calls and found a guy from my company who'd been looking for a place closer to downtown. Sent him pictures, quoted the rent, and by Thursday afternoon he wanted it and said he could move in by the 15th if the paperwork worked out, leaving only Katia's cooperation, which I tried to get by texting her a simple proposal where I'd move out. She could stay through the end of the lease, and I'd cover my share of the penalty for breaking it early, so it'd be a clean break with no drama and everyone moving on. But she called instead of texting back, her voice calmer now as she said she didn't want me to move out and wanted to really talk, pausing before saying she'd been hasty and that Dimitri wasn't what she thought and she'd made a mistake raising it the way she did. And I told her that didn't change anything and that she could either agree to the lease terms or we'd both be stuck in an awkward situation until October, which made her quiet before she asked where I was planning to go. And when I said Austin and explained my company had a regional manager position open for the Southwest Territory with more money, better weather, and a fresh start, and that my boss had already offered me the job. The silence on the other end told me she'd assumed I'd stick around and leaving the state wasn't part of her plan. But she agreed to sign the paperwork the next day, and Friday morning we met at the leasing office where she looked like she'd been crying, though some of it felt like performance. And we sat across from each other signing documents without making eye contact until she tried one last time, asking if we could slow down and if maybe I was making this bigger than it needed to be. Saying she never actually did anything with Dimitri and it was just feelings she could work through. And I held her gaze and told her that the fact she could even ask for what she asked told me everything I needed to know. That someone who wants to marry me doesn't need to explore other options first. And she opened her mouth to argue, then closed it and walked out without another word. And Saturday morning Cody showed up with his truck and we spent 8 hours packing and loading everything I was taking, leaving most of the furniture since the apartment had been furnished when we moved in. Taking only my clothes, gaming setup, personal stuff, and some kitchen equipment I'd bought myself. And by Saturday evening my half of the apartment was empty and I left the keys on the counter with a note that just said good luck. Which Cody thought was too nice because he'd wanted me to leave a printed screenshot of her asking for the break. But I was done and didn't need the last word. Just needed to be gone. So Sunday morning I was on I-35 heading south toward Austin with 12 hours of empty highway and aviation history podcasts. Passing through Oklahoma City around lunch. Stopping for gas in Dallas around dinner. Watching Texas plates start to outnumber everything else. And crossing into Austin city limits just after 9 as the skyline lit up against the dark. A new city, new job, new life. And I didn't look back once. And the first few weeks there blurred into logistics like finding an apartment, setting up utilities, and getting oriented at the new office where my territory covered Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and parts of Colorado with lots of regional carriers, small airports, and flight time. The Austin office more relaxed and collaborative than what I was used to. My boss Paul, a former Air Force guy, caring more about results than appearances. And in that first month I spent more time in the air and in hangars than at my desk, starting with El Paso for a week. Long comprehensive documentation review. Phoenix the next week for software certification testing. Then driving to some tiny airport in the hill country where a charter company needed compliance consulting because their previous specialist had botched something and they were facing fines. And every successful certification was another win. Every new client another piece of proof that I'd made the right call. Because the work itself hadn't changed, but my head was finally in a better place. I wasn't just clocking in anymore. I was actually invested, and the work kept me busy, which was exactly what I needed. While Cody kept me updated on the KC situation since he'd maintained connections with some mutual friends who were more than happy to share information. And man, it was a mess. Katia tried to spin the narrative for about 48 hours before giving up because my text to her family made that impossible. Her own father was telling people she'd asked for a break to pursue a coworker, and her own sister was saying she couldn't believe Katia would throw away what she had. So the story was out and it wasn't flattering, and apparently she doubled down on Dimitri after I left. Figured if she'd lost me over him she might as well see what was actually there. And they started dating officially about 2 weeks after I moved. with Cody sending me updates like a sports sir. Week 1 they were inseparable, eating lunch together in the office every day. Week 3 she was posting couple pictures with captions about finding her person. Week 5 she introduced him to friends as her boyfriend, and it was moving fast, which made sense because she needed to prove the whole thing was worth it. Then week 8 happened, because Dimitri had a fiancée, not an ex-fiancée but a current fiancée, a woman in Chicago who he'd been engaged to for over a year, and Katia was a side piece. The emotional connection, the late nights at the office, the understanding she thought was so special and different from what she had with me was just entertainment for a guy bored with his actual relationship who saw an easy target. And she found out when the fiancé found her Instagram. Apparently some photo Katia posted had location data that didn't match Dimitri's supposed work trip. So the fiancé did some digging, found Katia's profile, connected the dots, and discovered a whole relationship her future husband had been hiding. And the confrontation happened publicly with comments on Katia's photos calling her out, messages to mutual friends explaining the situation, screenshots shared across multiple platforms. Because the fiancé had receipts, text messages between Dimitri and Katia, a restaurant reservation made under a fake name, hotel charges on a credit card statement, and she posted everything. So everyone in Katia's social circle found out at the same time that she'd left her fiancé for a guy who had been playing her the entire time. And to make it worse, Dimitri didn't even try to defend her, because when confronted he threw Katia under the bus completely, told his fiancé that Katia had pursued him aggressively and he'd just been too nice to shut it down, said she misread professional friendliness as romantic interest, basically making her look desperate and delusional. And while his fiancé didn't buy it entirely, she wanted to believe it. So they went to counseling and started posting photos together again within a month, with him keeping his relationship, his reputation, and his comfortable life, while Katia got nothing but public humiliation and a lesson in being someone's side piece. And Cody called me the night it all went down laughing so hard he could barely breathe, saying he'd never seen karma work that fast, and I didn't feel happy about it exactly, more like satisfied, like the choice I'd made was the right one and now there was proof. And after that Katia went quiet on social media with no more posts, no more stories, no more carefully filtered photos of her perfect life, because the image she'd spent years building was toast and everyone knew it, and her agency let her go 3 weeks later. Officially a restructuring, but unofficially one of her co-workers told Cody that clients had started asking to work with different designers because nobody wanted their brand associated with the woman whose messy personal life had just played out across Instagram. And in the creative industry, reputation is everything, and hers was gone. While meanwhile I was thriving, hitting my sales targets for the first quarter, getting positive feedback from 3 different clients about my certification work, starting to build a routine in Austin with the gym in the morning, work during the day, exploring the city on weekends, finding a great apartment near downtown with a view of Ladybird Lake, hiking the trails on weekends, joining a recreational volleyball league through work, making friends with guys from the office who were also transplants from other cities. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was actually living my own life. Instead of constantly adjusting to what someone else wanted, just doing my thing. And honestly, it was great. Because 6 months after moving to Austin, I was doing better than I had in years. More settled, more confident, more like myself, with the job turning out even better than expected, my territory expanding, my numbers solid, my boss already talking about a promotion to director level within the next year, and I'd started dating casually around month 4, nothing serious, just getting back out there. And then I met Rebecca. She was a sales engineer for a different aviation company, and we met at a conference in Dallas where we ended up at the same dinner table with a group of people and spent the whole meal talking to each other while ignoring everyone else. Because she was smart and direct and had this dry sense of humor that caught me off guard constantly. And our first actual date was at this taco place she swore had the best al pastor in Texas, which she was absolutely right about, and we talked for 3 hours, and it felt easy in a way my relationship with Katia never was. Because she knew my story, at least the abbreviated version, and didn't push for details. Just said it sounded like I'd handled it the right way and changed the subject. And with Rebecca I just existed. She liked me for who I actually was. When I came home exhausted and wanted to order pizza and watch something mindless, she was into it. And when I wanted to spend a Saturday hiking instead of at some trendy brunch place, she grabbed her boots. And Cody met her when he came down to visit, and his verdict was that she was a keeper, saying she was the first girlfriend of mine who actually seemed interested in me rather than just interested in having a boyfriend. And through the grapevine back in Kansas I kept hearing bits about Katia's life, That she'd moved back to KC after staying with her parents in Chicago for a while, and that her design career had stalled because the whole drama had played out in front of her professional network, and Victor and I stayed loosely in touch with the occasional text about the Chiefs or asking how the job was going. Never mentioning his daughter directly, though the subtext was always there. And then 8 months after the breakup this happened, when my company sent me back to Kansas for a week for a big client meeting and regulatory review that required my specific expertise, meaning I'd be in town for 5 days, and I wasn't worried about running into Katia, because even though I knew she'd moved back to Kansas City from Chicago, it's a big place and the odds of randomly crossing paths felt basically zero. And the work went smoothly with 4 days of meetings, inspections, and documentation reviews. So by Thursday evening I was finished and had one free night before my flight home Friday afternoon. And Cody insisted on meeting up and suggested this new place in the Crossroads district that had opened after I left and was supposed to have great food, which I agreed to, and the restaurant was packed when I got there, with Cody already having grabbed a table near the back and ordered an appetizer. And we spent the first hour catching up properly on his work, my work, Rebecca, his latest dating disasters, normal stuff, and then I saw her, Katia, across the restaurant with 2 women I didn't recognize, dressed up with full makeup and the whole presentation, but with something off. That confidence she used to have. Looking forced now, like she was trying too hard, laughing a little too loud and scanning the room to see who was noticing her. And I watched her for about 30 seconds and noticed she'd lost weight and that the outfit looked cheaper than her usual style. The agency job clearly not paying what her freelance work used to. And she hadn't noticed me yet, so I debated leaving until Cody turned to see what caught my attention, and when he spotted her, his face split into this huge grin as he told me not to dare leave because this was perfect. And the universe was handing me a gift wrapped in a bow and I should accept it gracefully. And when I told him I didn't need any drama, he said it wasn't about drama, but that she needed to see me happy and moved on, because that would do more than any words ever could. So I stayed and kept talking and kept eating my food until about 20 minutes later, when she noticed me. That fake happy look on her face flickering for a second before she put it back on, touching up her lipstick with her phone camera and walking toward our table while Cody leaned back and quietly told me not to give her anything. And she stopped and said, "Nate, I didn't know you were back in town," and I replied that I was just in for work and leaving tomorrow, without standing up or offering her a seat. And when she stood there clearly expecting more and I didn't offer anything, she pressed on, asking how I was doing and if Austin was treating me well, and after a pause if I was seeing anyone. And I told her Austin was good. The job was great, and yes, I was seeing someone and it was going really well. And the look on her face was priceless in that moment when she realized the backup plan she'd been counting on wasn't there anymore. And when she asked if I was happy, actually happy, I said yes I was. And then she said she'd been thinking about everything and knew now that what she asked for was wrong and that she wished she could take it back. And I nodded and said I appreciated her saying that, and then told her I hoped she found what she was looking for, Katia, before turning back to Cody and picking up my fork. And she stood there for a few seconds not knowing what to do while I didn't look up, and then walked away without another word. And once she was back at her table, Cody commented on her face and I shrugged and said whatever as he raised his glass to growing a pair at exactly the right time and said he'd be telling this story at every barbecue for the rest of his life. And I told him to knock himself out, and we finished our meal. I caught a flight home to Austin the next day, and Rebecca picked me up from the airport, hugged me, asked about my trip, and we grabbed dinner at our usual spot. And honestly, I've never been happier. And guys, we are so close to hitting 3,000 subscribers on this channel. So if you're not subscribed yet, please consider subscribing, because it genuinely helps us reach that 3,000 mark and supports the channel more than you might think.